Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock and it's Friday, so it is time for Flashcard Friday. And today is going to be part one of probably three parts. Um, but I wanted to take on the 10 lies that Christians believe. Alex Seeley, she's a pastor in Tennessee, and she does a lot of speaking engagements as well. And she's written a book called Tailor Made. If you haven't read it, you really should check it out because it's super good. But in there, she talks about these particular 10 lives. And when I went and looked it up on my own, the 10 that she mentions in there are actually the top 10. Uh, and it's I see more and more, especially with social media and all of that, that we are deceived so easily, and that deception can lead us to start to believe some of these lies. So today, because I'm going to do a little bit of background, we're only going to cover two of those lies. And then in the coming weeks, I hope to do four each time. If not, if it takes us a little bit longer, it takes us a little bit longer. And that's totally okay. Hey Carol, hey Becky. I see that you guys are there. Oh, and there's Pat too. That means I have to behave. But we'll see. I might still get in a little bit of trouble. You just never know. Um, but first off, I want to start out with why. Why is it that we find ourselves falling for these so easily? And Satan has some very deceptive techniques that he uses, and there are two of them that really just kind of jump out. And the first one is he will make us question our own identity. And it usually comes in the form of shame or guilt, or self doubt, um, negative self talk, those different types of things. Um, and then the other one that he does is he will make you question the nature of God. And usually when he does that, he tries to turn God into a punitive God, or to make you think that God's holding back on you. So if you think in Genesis with Eve, because there are two times in Scripture that Satan actually speaks to a person. There's in obviously in Job he speaks to God, but there are two times in Scripture where he's allowed to speak to an actual person. And in Genesis he talks to Eve, and he makes her question God's nature, and he uses God's own words against him, because what he does is he twists it just a little bit. And and what he says is, surely you won't die. God knows that if you eat from this tree, you're going to be as smart as he is. So he instantly makes her think that God's holding out. That God doesn't want her to be as smart as him. So he tempts her right into doing that, and then he attempts. He fails miserably, which is a good thing. But he attempts to do something similar with Jesus, except this time he he questions the identity of Jesus, because he continue, like if you go back and you read that, probably the best one's in Matthew 4. But in there, he says, if you are the Son of God, then do this. If you are the Son of God, this won't happen to you. And when we think about that in our own lives, um, if God really loved you, he wouldn't let you be hurt by that person. Um, surely your boss isn't talking badly about you. Surely that person didn't mean to hurt you. And well, you're not smart enough to understand this, so maybe this was supposed to, maybe you made this happen to you. He uses all these different kinds of deceptive techniques, and what they're designed to do is they're designed to isolate us. They're designed to isolate us and make us kind of look within. And the second we start looking within, we start tearing ourselves apart. And that's really when you start to dig into these lies that we have a tendency to believe. That's what we're doing. We are literally isolating ourselves. So like one of the first lies. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some people, some actual people from the Bible, and I'm going to show how incorrect these particular lies are. So the first one is, I can do it alone. Now, okay, just right off the bat, Jesus, the one person who could theoretically do it alone, every time he was faced with something difficult, when he went to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's sweating droplets of blood, he takes three people with him. He takes Peter, James, and John. So, here you have the one person who could do it alone is choosing not to. And then here's another one, David. David, before he became king, well, actually, he had been anointed king by this point, but he's shepherding, the sheep in the fields, and he takes on a lion and he takes on a bear. And he's out there by himself, and he beats them. They talk about, in different parts of 1 Samuel, they talk about how David killed 10,000 men by himself. But now in 1 Samuel 26, we have David, he's in a position where he could have done it on his own. He's being chased by King Saul. King Saul wants him dead. And, David knows that he's been anointed king, and Saul is just petrified that it's actually going to happen, so he's chasing him down. David has had one opportunity to kill him and chose not to, and now a second opportunity has presented itself. So I want you to see in 1 Samuel 26:6, David sees that Saul is asleep. So he's going to go over there and he's going to do something, because all of Saul's men are asleep as well. And David could do this by himself. But here's what he says in verse 6. Then David asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Joab's brother, Abishai son of Zeruiah, who will go with me into the camp of Saul? I'll go with you, answered Abishai. Now Abishai is David's cousin, and he is pretty much David's defender. It's like every time you see somebody attack David, Abishai is the one that says, yeah, let me kill him. Because if you read further on in that story, Abishai wants to kill, King Saul, and David stops him. They just wind up taking, they take a spear and a water jug that was right next to the king to show that they could have killed him and all of that. But David didn't do it alone. Now, if you flip to 2 Samuel 11, you find a time when David is alone. And he's put himself alone kind of on purpose. And, because it's like literally chapter 11 starts out with, when all of the other kings went off to war, David stayed home. So all of his fighting men are gone. David's at home alone. And the whole thing with Bathsheba happens. So he winds up having an affair. He winds up lying to a whole bunch of people. And he winds up setting somebody up to be killed because he's alone. Now, in chapter, throughout all of this, he thinks he's gotten away with it. But in chapter 12, Nathan enters the scene, and Nathan is a prophet, and Nathan pretty much calls him out, and says, "You've been deceptive long enough." And David immediately repents of his ways. Now, Nathan is pretty much with David, from that point forward. But Nathan is that one who was willing to call David out. So when you think about your own life, who's your Abishai? Who's that ride or die friend who's going to stick with you, who's going to defend you with their last breath? And who's your Nathan? Who's that person that's going to call you out when you're stepping out of line, and bring you back into a right relationship? I think that's probably the biggest way to defeat this particular lie, is to say you can't do it alone. You need an Abishai, and you need a Nathan. I have those people in my life. If I didn't have them, I couldn't do the things that I do now, and I wouldn't want to. I am so blessed that God put those people in my life that I don't want to be without them. And I hope that you guys already have that. And if not, I hope that it's one of the first things that you seek, because we don't ever want to isolate. We don't ever want to be alone. I can't stress how important that one is. I lived alone for too long. Don't stay there. The second lie I'm going to take on is vulnerability is a weakness. Now let me tell you up front, I battled this one. I even still catch myself battling it. The majority of my life I battled this one. I grew up in a family where you didn't show weakness. You didn't let people in, because if you didn't let people in, then you couldn't be hurt, and never let them see you cry. That whole thing. That was my family life. I grew up with 3 older brothers. It was kill or be killed, and my brothers never. I never let them see me cry unless I was so hurt I didn't have a choice. And sometimes we think that that's a good thing, but I think more than anybody, Esther shows that it's not. Now, typically, when you hear people pull up the story of Esther, they talk about the verse that's right before this passage here in chapter 4, verses 15 through 17, because verse 14 is the one, that says, "Who knows, perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." And I meant to say something in the beginning of this. My NIV started to tear, and I don't have another NIV currently. So this is a Christian Standard Bible that's going to read just a little bit differently than the NIV, which I typically talk from, but it's still a very good one. So again, that wording is going to be a little bit different. But typically, you hear people when they talk about Esther, they talk about this: you were created for such a time as this. But Esther's response to her uncle, because it was her uncle, excuse me, Mordecai, who said that to her. Her response to him is going to show how not only is vulnerability not a weakness, but it is the biggest sign of courage that you could ever have. And verses 15 through 17 go kind of like this. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my female servants will also fast in the same way. After that I will go to the king, even if it's against the law. If I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went and did everything Esther had commanded him. Now, what's happening here is there's a guy, Haman, who's gotten into the king's ear, and he's making them think that Jews are bad and that they need to be killed, and the primary person he wants to kill is Mordecai, Esther's cousin, and nobody knows that Esther is a Jew, at this point in time. And the rule during that day and age was that you could not approach the king unless he called for you. Okay, so she's about to present herself to him. And if he doesn't accept her, they will immediately kill her. They won't even ask questions. They will immediately kill her. And not only that, but she's doing this after fasting. No food, no water for 3 days. So you're talking a completely pale white, cheeks sunken in woman is about to present herself in front of the king. As beautiful as she could not have been very pretty in that moment. But she knew that she had to be first and foremost, she had to be right with God. Her heart had to be in the right place. But she had to be vulnerable. She had to be willing to die in this situation. And it winds up, it winds up very well. She throws a couple of gatherings for the king and for Haman, and then in the end she exposes Haman's plot to kill the Jews, and she winds up saving the Israelites who were in captivity at that point in time. But she couldn't have done it without being vulnerable. Now, here we have a choice. We can choose to guard ourselves and put walls up and not let anybody in. And typically, we could ask, we could say, what do we gain? But I guess the real question for me is, what do we lose when we do that? And I think C.S. Lewis, he probably wrote it better than I could ever speak it. So I'm just gonna say it here, and you can look this up. Again, this comes from C.S. Lewis. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. So if you go back to these up here, God's nature is to love. He's not a punitive God. Yes, there are times that he will discipline his children, but he is the God of love. This book is not a rule book. This book is a love story between God and us. Our identity, we are his children. We don't need to feel shame. We don't need to feel guilt. We don't need to isolate. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be willing to be hurt. Jesus says it pretty clear, in this life you will have trouble, but take heart, because he's overcome the world. His nature tops everything. The battle's already won. We just have to walk it out. Trust this book. Trust it above all else. Because this is where your real story is found. This is where your love is found. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me. Next week we're going to take on a few more of these lies. Again, I appreciate you guys so much. If there's anything that you guys ever want to talk about, put it in the comments. Send me a text, send me an email. I would love to hear some different things that you guys want to talk about. Again, I love you all. Thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Talk to you later. Bye.